Why opposites attract, then fall apart. Carl Jung. Carl Jung observed that we do not fall in love with a person so much as with an image the psyche has been carrying for years, waiting for a face to wear it. And here is where I want to begin, with Heraclitus, the old Greek that Jung returned to again and again, who wrote that the way up and the way down are one and the same, meaning the very road that lifts you is the road that will also bring you low. And I think anyone who has fallen hard for someone, only to watch that same fire burn the whole house down later, knows exactly what he meant, without needing the philosophy explained. The ecstasy and the wreckage are not two different roads. They are the same road walked in two directions. And Jung would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? The very intensity that convinced you this was fate is the same intensity that will convince you later this was a mistake." Because the intensity was never really about the other person at all. It was about something in you meeting its outer image for the first time. And when the image and the person stop matching, the whole thing seems to collapse, though nothing collapsed except an illusion you mistook for a fact. And if you have ever lain awake trying to figure out how someone who once felt like your whole future could start to feel like a stranger across the table, you are not confused because you are broken. You are confused because you were taught to trust the glow as information about them, when the glow was always information about you, waiting to be read correctly. So let us sit with this for a moment, before we go further. 3 quiet admissions. First, I admit that what feels like destiny in another person may be my own unconscious looking back at me through their face. Second, I admit that the fading of that feeling is not proof I chose wrong. It may be proof that something in me is finally ready to be seen. Third, I admit that the only lasting way through this is inward, not through the next person, but through my own hidden half. And so I make the unconscious conscious. Say it with me. I make the unconscious conscious. Again, I make the unconscious conscious. And if this kind of honest look at the psyche is useful to you, consider staying, so that tomorrow's teaching finds you too. If something in you just went quiet while I said that, type the words "face it" in the comments. Let it be a small seal on what you already know is true. The first key is that you did not fall for a stranger. You fell for a stranger wearing your own missing half. Jung called this figure the Anima in a man and the Animus in a woman, the inner contrasexual image every psyche carries whether welcomed or not, and he wrote plainly that this figure is unconsciously projected upon the person of the beloved, which simply means the person across the table did not create the electricity you felt. They only stood in the right light for something already alive in you to leap outward and land on them. Think of the last time you met someone and felt an instant unreasonable certainty, already known, already met in a way strangers should not be able to meet you. That certainty was not information about them. It was recognition, not of the person, of the image. A shape your own psyche had been quietly carrying for years, waiting for a surface to fall on. Imagine an ordinary Tuesday. A woman stops at her usual coffee counter. A man ahead of her holds the door, says something small, and yet she cannot stop thinking about him all day. Nothing he said was extraordinary. The weight was never in the doorway. It was in her. Some undeveloped warmth finding, for one unguarded second, a face to wear. This is why 2 people can meet the same stranger, and only one feels struck by lightning. The stranger did not change. The carrying psyche did. Think too of a guarded, logical man who meets a woman warm and quick to laugh, and something in him goes quiet with relief. He does not think, "She resembles a part of myself I have neglected," he thinks. She is the one. Both statements may point at the same truth, but only one survives the years. The fire is real. The wiring is simply not what you assumed. And once you see that wiring, falling in love looks less like fate finding you, and more like your own psyche finding a mirror large enough to stand in front of. Notice how quickly the mind builds a whole history that was never lived, a future sketched before a second conversation happens. This is not foolishness. It is the ordinary hunger of an unmet part of the self reaching for the nearest bright surface, and it will keep happening. In different faces and different cities, until the reaching turns inward instead of outward. I do not confuse the spark with the person. The second key is that the opening glow of love is borrowed light, and this is not meant to make it less beautiful, only more honest. Jung called the meeting of these inner figures a syzygy, an ancient word for a paired yoking of opposites, and he wrote of the Anima that she is the archetype of life itself, which tells you why falling under her spell, or his, can feel less like meeting a person and more like meeting existence, suddenly awake, suddenly glowing at the edges. Think of the moon for a moment. It has no light of its own. It only reflects a fire burning somewhere else. And yet stand under a full moon and tell me it does not feel like its own kind of miracle. This is close to what happens in early love. The person in front of you is the moon, luminous, undeniable, and what you are actually seeing is your own fire, reflected back at an angle that makes it look like it belongs entirely to them. Jung recalled standing before a great work of art with someone close to him and hearing himself say, simply, "It is art," a small remark, but revealing, a man aware even in a charged moment that what moves us is not always what we think is moving us. Picture the ordinary version. You meet someone at a gathering. They ask a question nobody else has thought to ask. And within a week, you are certain you have never been understood like this before. Replaying the conversation on the drive home, smiling at a red light for no reason you could explain. And none of this is foolish. This is the psyche projecting its own hidden richness onto whatever surface is bright enough to hold it. But notice how little you actually know of them yet. Their bad mornings, their old grudges, all still hidden, and yet the glow arrives whole and finished before the person has even been fully seen, which tells you plainly where it originates. So here is the plain teaching underneath the poetry. The glow does not measure the other person. It measures the size of what was waiting inside you to be met. A man who has starved his own tenderness for years will feel unbearable relief around a woman who is simply warm, and call that relief her doing. And it is, in part, but the deeper part is his own tenderness finally breathing again through hers. The wiring behind the glow is just not what the glow itself claims, and knowing this does not have to dim the fire. It can let you hold it more lightly, grateful for the light, never mistaking the reflection for the source, never asking the moon to burn on its own when its whole beauty was always the borrowing. And this same borrowed light is why the joke lands funnier. The song sounds new, the familiar street feels charged, none of it manufactured, simply your own inner life, lit from within, finding a companion to walk beside while it glows. I honor the glow without mistaking it for the whole truth. The third key is the part almost nobody wants to hear, which is that falling apart is not a failure of the relationship, it is the projection finally meeting its limit. Because a real living person cannot hold an image forever, they can only pretend to for a while, and eventually the pretending runs out, not because they changed, but because they were never fully seen to begin with. Let me walk you through how this actually happens. Hour by hour, in a very ordinary week. Imagine two people, 6 months in, still in the glow. On Monday she leaves a note in his bag before work, and he carries it around all day like a small treasure. On Wednesday, he notices she gets quiet when he brings up his old friends, and he tells himself it is nothing. On Friday, they argue for the first time about something small, whose turn it was to call the landlord, and something in him flares up far past the size of the actual issue, and something in her goes cold, far past what the moment calls for, and neither of them understands why a conversation about a landlord suddenly feels like a referendum on the whole relationship. By Sunday they have made up, but a small crack has opened that was not there in January. And here is what Jung would want you to notice. That crack is not proof they were wrong for each other. The crack is the sound of the actual human being finally becoming visible underneath the image that was standing in for them. Think of the portrait behind me for a moment, the one hanging on the wall of every early love, painted quickly, painted lovingly, painted from the little evidence available in those first weeks. A portrait is not a lie exactly, it simply leaves out everything it has not yet been shown. So when the crack appears, when the ordinary face starts showing through the paint, The instinct is to call the portrait a deception, but it was never a deception, it was only unfinished. And Jung would say the crack is not damage, the crack is information finally arriving. Consider a different couple for a moment. A man who fell for a woman because she seemed endlessly independent, needed no one, asked for nothing, and he built a quiet peace around that image. Until one ordinary evening, she comes home from a hard day and simply asks him to hold her. No words about it, no explanation, and something in him recoils before he can stop it. This is not who I thought she was, he thinks, and he is right. She is not who he thought. She was never only that. The independence was real, but it was never the whole woman, only the part of her that had first caught the light. And now the rest of her, tired, needing, human, is stepping forward to be met. And this is the moment most people mistake for the relationship failing, when it is in fact the relationship finally starting to include a real person instead of a useful half of one. Disillusionment, taken apart plainly, means exactly what it says. The illusion is leaving, and the love, if there is love underneath it, does not leave with it. It simply stands there, suddenly asked to be true, without the scaffolding. This is harder than falling. It asks something falling never asked. It asks you to stay once the special effects are gone. And that is precisely why so many walk away right here, mistaking the end of the illusion for the end of the story. When Jung would say the story, the real one, was only just now being handed to them. And if you look back honestly at your own history, you may notice this exact pattern repeating. The same season of a relationship, somewhere between month 6 and month 18, where the first crack always seems to open, and instead of treating that season as a verdict, you might learn to treat it as a threshold, the place where the real relationship, or the real ending, actually begins to be decided, not by the glow, but by what two people are willing to see once the glow has thinned. I let the glow crack open, so the real person can stand in the space. The fourth key is the one that stops people cold when they finally see it in their own history, and it is this. If you have ever noticed that you keep falling for a certain type, a certain temperament, a certain wound, wearing a different face each time, that is not bad luck, and it is not a coincidence. That is an unintegrated inner figure looking for the same doorway again and again, because the actual work was never done the first 3 times. Imagine someone who keeps finding their way to partners who are emotionally unavailable, cool, hard to reach, and every time the relationship ends the same way, with the same complaint, they never really let me in, and every time this person swears the next one will be different, and every time, somehow, without meaning to, they find the next one who is also, in their own particular way, hard to reach. This is not a pattern in the world, this is a pattern in the psyche looking for resolution and mistaking repetition for progress. Jung would say the animus or anima has not been met on its own ground yet, so it keeps auditioning strangers for the role instead, and each stranger fails the same audition in roughly the same way, because the role was never meant to be filled by a stranger at all. It was meant to be recognized and owned inside. And if you trace the corridor back far enough, you often find the same doorway appearing in adolescence. In the very first crush that ever left a mark, the shape was already being drawn then, long before there were adult words for it. And every doorway since has simply been another attempt, patient and repetitive, to finally walk all the way through, instead of turning back at the threshold. If this teaching is finding you at the right moment, consider subscribing, so the next one arrives when you need it. It costs you nothing, and it keeps this fire lit for the both of us. I stop auditioning strangers for a part only I can play. The fifth key is the deepest one, and I want to walk through it in pieces, because it will not survive being said all at once. First, consider what the anima and animus actually are, not obstacles to love, but Jung called them psychopomps, guides, whose real job is to lead you toward your own unconscious, not toward a spouse. The confusion begins the moment we assume the guide is the destination. A compass is not the place it points to, and yet how many of us have married the compass, built a whole life around it, and then wondered years later why it will not sit still and simply be a home. The ache you feel when a relationship stops glowing is often the ache of a compass being asked, finally, what it actually pointed toward all along, and the honest answer usually points back at your own undeveloped parts, your unlived tenderness, if you are a guarded man, your unclaimed authority, if you are a woman who has spent a lifetime deferring. A compass honored for what it is will serve you a lifetime. A compass mistaken for home will only leave you homesick in the very place you built to end the homesickness. And this homesickness does not always feel like sadness. Sometimes it is only a low hum underneath an otherwise good life. A sense that something is almost right but not quite. And that hum, Jung would say, is the compass still pointing, past the marriage, past the good years, toward the part of you not yet claimed. Second, consider what disillusionment actually offers you, if you can stay with it instead of fleeing it. Jung wrote that there is no birth of consciousness without pain. Notice he did not say without ending, he said without pain, which means the pain of watching your image of someone dissolve is not a sign to leave, it is the exact site where consciousness is trying to be born. Imagine a woman who married a man because he seemed so certain, so solid, and 3 years in she discovers he is frightened underneath the certainty, frightened of failing her. And her first instinct is betrayal. You are not who I thought. But the man she thought she married was partly her own need for solid ground given a face, and the frightened man, now standing in front of her, uncertain, human, breathing, is the actual person she has the chance to finally meet. This meeting offers no glow, only presence. But Jung insisted that if there is any reaction between two people, both are transformed, like two chemical substances. If a reaction occurs at all, both are altered, and this unglamorous transformation is the only thing that was ever actually worth having. The glow was the invitation. This is the meal. And I think of a man 8 years married, who finally admits one ordinary evening that he has never felt as capable as she believed him to be. And instead of the collapse he expects, something in the room settles, because for the first time she is loving him, not an idea of him. And I think too of how many marriages quietly starve, not from betrayal, but simply because neither person was willing to let the image crack, both maintaining the portrait long after the real face had begun to show. Third, consider the practical shape of this work. When the old disappointment rises, that flash of, "They are not who I thought," pause before the accusation forms fully, and ask a harder question underneath it. What did I need this person to be? And what does that need actually belong to? Was I asking them to be endlessly warm because I have not yet found my own warmth? Was I asking them to be endlessly strong because I have not yet stood on my own certainty? This is not self-blame. It is locating the missing property and returning it to its rightful owner, which is you. Pause for a moment and pick one real disappointment, past or present, and ask plainly, what part of this was about them, and what part was my own undeveloped half, knocking on the wrong door? You do not need to answer aloud to anyone, only honestly to yourself, because the withdrawal of a projection, Jung taught, is quiet interior work, not a dramatic confrontation. It happens in the privacy of your own noticing, and some nights this looks like nothing at all, just a person lying awake, resorting what belongs to them from what they had loaned to someone else. And over months, not overnight, the accusations in your own mind may soften. They are not who I thought slowly becoming. They are not only what I needed, a smaller sentence, but a truer one. And truer sentences are what actual love is eventually built from. Fourth and last, understand that none of this means the falling apart was meaningless, or that the person you loved was simply a screen. Jung was careful here. The syzygy, the pairing of opposites, is not an illusion to be discarded once seen through. It is closer to a doorway. Real people walk through real doorways, into rooms that are also real. The image brought you to the threshold, but the threshold is not the marriage. The marriage, to become durable, has to happen between two actual people who have each done a little of this work, who can look at the other's ordinary Tuesday face and choose it, not despite its ordinariness but because of it. That is not the collapse of romance. That is romance finally growing feet, and this is the whole turn of the fifth key, that the guide was never meant to be enshrined, only followed, inward, past the beloved, past the disappointment, until it delivers you at last to the very thing it was always pointing toward, which was never the other person, and was never even the relationship. It was you, waiting on the other side of your own projection, to finally be found. And once you have been found even a little, you stop needing the next person to complete a picture, and you start simply being able to see them, plainly, in the ordinary light of an ordinary day, which turns out to be the only light love was ever meant to be seen by. I return the missing half to myself, instead of borrowing it forever. The sixth key, and the gentlest one, is that this whole arc, the glow and the fall, and whatever comes after, is not a verdict on whether you loved wisely or foolishly. It is simply how the psyche does its most important work, using another human being as the occasion. And I want you to hold that word occasion for a moment, because it changes the whole shape of the story you have been telling yourself about your own romantic history. An occasion is not a mistake, and it is not a prize. It is simply the place where something needed to happen, and it happened. Imagine two people years into a marriage, past the glow, past several disillusionments, who have quietly stopped asking each other to complete them. Picture an ordinary Tuesday evening in that home, dishes in the sink, a show neither of them is really watching. One of them reaches over without thinking and rests a hand on the other's knee. No words, no performance. Nothing that would make a good story if you told it at a party. And yet Jung would tell you that small, unremarkable gesture holds more of the real work of love than the night of the first kiss ever could. Because nobody in that room is asking to be rescued anymore. Nobody is auditioning the other for a part written years earlier by an old wound. They are simply two people, tired, ordinary, present, and something steadier has grown in the space where the borrowed image used to stand. This is not a lesser love than the one that began with fireworks. It is very often a deeper one, because it survived the only test that actually matters, the test of what remains once the image has stepped aside and only the person is left standing there. And here is the mercy in it. Every fading spark you have ever grieved, every relationship that seemed to promise everything and then quietly stopped glowing, was not proof that you chose badly. It was the psyche doing exactly what it came to do, using the nearest available face to show you the shape of your own missing half, so that one day, perhaps not with that person, perhaps with someone else, perhaps simply within yourself, you could finally stop reaching outward for what was always meant to be claimed within. And if you look back tonight at the relationships that broke your heart, I wonder if you can hold them a little differently now, not as failures to be regretted, but as honest occasions, each one carrying you a little further along a road that was always, in the end, leading you home to yourself. I let love be a meeting of two real people, not two borrowed images. Here is the whole picture. The spark was never about them. It was your own missing half, wearing a stranger's face. The glow was borrowed light, beautiful and true, and still not proof of a permanent fit. The falling apart was not failure. It was the image finally stepping aside so a real person could stand there. The pattern that repeats is a doorway you keep knocking on outside yourself when the key was always inside. The deep work is returning the missing property to its rightful owner, so love stops being rescue and starts being meeting. And what survives all of that, if anything does, is no longer romance in the old sense. It is two people, finally visible to each other, choosing to stay. And if you trace all 6 of these keys back to their root, you find they were never 6 separate teachings at all. They were 6 turns of the same single key. The key that says the opposite you fell for was always a messenger, and the message, patiently repeated across every face you have ever loved, was simply, come and find the rest of yourself. I make the unconscious conscious. Once more, I make the unconscious conscious. And if opposites drew you together in the first place, perhaps the real question was never why it faded, but what it was trying to show you all along. Are you willing to find out